Okay, good evening, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Brooke from the WorldTeach office in Cambridge, Mass, to speak about WorldTeach in Ecuador this evening. So thank you so much for your patience as we're just getting this ready to go and waiting for another panelist to join us. Tonight we're super excited to have a bunch of people on the line. So again, thanks for listening in. Amongst our listeners, we have some new applicants, those that have just been accepted into the Ecuador program, and others that are still interested in learning more about WorldTeach in Ecuador. We also have some panelists and alumni joining us from Ecuador and also in the States. So thanks again, and let's get started. Okay, to go over our agenda. So we're going to spend a few minutes meeting our panelists and learning a bit about their backgrounds and how they ended up getting joined into WorldTeach. Then we'll get into the specifics of our Ecuador program, including the status of a new partnership that we're in the process of finalizing and that we're very excited about. And also why there's a need for WorldTeach volunteers, the support that's provided for our volunteers, including financial funding from our partner, and then also the remaining volunteer fee. From there, we're going to focus on being in the classroom, what sort of cultural challenges you'll encounter in the school, what sort of resources you will or probably won't have in the classroom, and very importantly, we're going to talk about what's expected of our volunteers and how much time they're going to be committing to, class preparation, lesson plans, etc. After, we'll be discussing, of course, the most important, living in Ecuador, because this is not just a job, this is your life. So what are the housing placements like? Who will you be living with? What is the monthly stipend? And the big question, is it enough to live off of? What are activities that our volunteers get involved in outside the classroom? And as I mentioned, we have some alumni on the line, so we're going to hear personal stories from them as to, what it was like for them. At the end, we're going to quickly address the application process before we dedicate some time to questions and answers from our panelists. So we have a chat function that you should see on the right side of your screen, so feel free to text in questions. If they're relevant to the whole group, we're probably going to leave them for the end so we can address them together. Otherwise, we may be able to answer them as the discussion continues. So definitely feel free to write that in, and keep in mind that you guys are muted. And so I think that is it for now. Let's start. Okay, so here I am. That's a picture of me on the left with my sixth graders down in Colombia. I was a volunteer in Colombia last year through WorldTeach, and before that I had worked in a couple different industries in corporate America after graduating in journalism and sociology, but definitely most proud of my teaching experience last year in Colombia, which is why I'm now here in the office speaking with you guys. So Caitlyn, I would love for you to introduce yourself.
Absolutely. I'm really excited to be here at this webinar. I've been looking forward to it ever since we announced it, partially because I actually lived in Quito for a few months and I absolutely adored Ecuador. I thought it was a fantastic place to live, and I'm jealous of the people who get to go back or who are currently there. But I've spoken with a lot of you already via email or possibly over Skype if you completed your interview. My name's Caitlyn. I'm the admissions coordinator. Just a brief bio, most of the information's there, but I went to University of Notre Dame. I studied English and Spanish there. My first connection to WorldTeach was through the Costa Rica summer program all the way back in 2008. And then from there, I kind of just decided that I wanted to go into international education, so I taught on the U.S.-Mexico border for a little while. Then I moved to South America, and that was when I lived in Quito. And then I lived in Santiago, Chile for a few years as well. So I know I've waxed poetic about Ecuador and Quito with a few of you already, and if any of you guys want to see pictures, I will happily share them like I've already shared them with a few of you guys. So just feel free to reach out and ask any questions you have.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlyn. Love your picture. Love that moment that you captured. Okay, CJ, our field director, who is joining us from Ecuador. CJ, thanks so much for having us tonight. I know that you are very passionately connected to this program, so please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So for those of you listening, as you can see on our slideshow, I was actually an WorldTeach Ecuador volunteer in September of 2011. During that time, I lived and taught in Guayaquil and also in Ambato. And I had the unique experience of being in two cities because of some difficulties with my first job, so I ended up moving. In 2012, I moved back to the States, where I lived in New Mexico for a little while. And then in 2013, I saw that a field director position here in Quito was open, so I decided to apply and ended up moving back. I've been here now for almost a year and a half here, about a year and a half here in Quito, and I love it. Of the three places that I've lived in Ecuador, Quito is definitely my favorite. There's so much to do here. You can see in the picture there on the slideshow, although it's very cloudy, that's at the peak of a volcano, a mountain, just outside of Quito. And yeah, like has been said before, I think this is a fantastic program, and I'm really excited to be here, so I'm really excited for all of you that are applying and those of you that will be serving here in February.
Fantastic. CJ, a question for you. Do you remember back in 2011 how you first came about WorldTeach, and why did you end up deciding, you know, to go with WorldTeach versus another organization, and why specifically Ecuador?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you can see on the slide, so I studied TESOL in my undergrad, which was actually completely by chance because I just knew that I wanted to travel abroad, and I found out that my college had TESOL, so I decided to study that. And after graduation, a little while after graduation, I actually applied for the Peace Corps originally. But when I was nominated for a Peace Corps position, it was not in a Spanish-speaking country, and it wasn't exactly with English education, which is what I wanted. So I realized that I wanted to be teaching English, and I started looking for some alternatives, and through some Google searching, I found WorldTeach, and I was attracted to Ecuador because I knew I would get to teach English. I knew I would be in a Spanish-speaking country, and it fit in with my kind of my plans and my schedule, to be honest. So it was kind of by happenstance, but I'm really glad that I ended up here in Ecuador and with WorldTeach because I think it's a fantastic program.
Fantastic. Yes, Google is definitely our friend. Okay, fantastic. So we're going to go on to the rest of our panelists. So actually here you're going to see we have two panelists, Becca Lorenzen and Caitlyn Cook. Becca is still not on the line. I'm afraid that she might be having some technical difficulties, but that's okay. Caitlyn, we're so glad you're joining us actually from Ecuador. So please, we would love to hear you introduce yourself.
Definitely. So I'm Caitlyn, and I studied interpersonal communication at East Carolina University. And I graduated in December 2012, and about a semester before I graduated, as well as CJ, I Googled ways to go abroad, and I found WorldTeach almost immediately, and I was so excited. I remember calling and just being in disbelief, like, you promised me you're real. And they were like, yes, we swear. I was like, okay. So I applied and everything, and I actually applied to go to Panama, and Panama ended up not working out. The program was canceled for that semester, for that year, and they said, well, we have an opening in Ecuador, and I was like, great, that's where I'm going then. And it was the best decision, I think, ever. I'm so happy that Panama didn't work out. And I lived on the coast in Machala, on the southern coast near the border of Peru, for a full year. And then after my year was over, I decided to come to Quito to work at SEC, which is an institute here where there are a few volunteers right now. And I imagine that some of the new volunteers may be placed at as well. I'm not sure.
Yep, we'll get into that in a couple minutes.
So that's it. That's that's it. That's me.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us, Caitlyn. I think also your feedback is really important because you've lived in a couple different regions and you're now working at the school, though independently. So Caitlyn is not a WorldTeach volunteer right now. She finished her service last year, but you're now at the school where our volunteers will be next year. So thank you so much for joining us. So let's continue. Okay, so this is a very important page. So everybody, pay attention. Okay, WorldTeach in Ecuador. Why are we here? How long have we been here? What's going on? Because we have a lot of changes right now. So as you can see, we have been in Ecuador since 1992, which is amazing. So we're in our 22nd year of service, which makes our Ecuador program one of our longest running WorldTeach programs. So we are very, very proud of that. So over the years, we've worked with a few different organizations that have specifically requested and helped fund our volunteers. And so we're currently in the works of finalizing a new contract that is going to change our program pretty drastically. So as you can see right here on the left, these are kind of the details of our current program. We have volunteers in a few different sites throughout the country. They're working in different schools, etc. And on the bottom, you can see the volunteer commitment fee is extremely high. With our new partnership, which you can see on the right, our major changes are going to be that all of the volunteers will now be working at the same school in Quito. So this is an urban-only placement. So everybody's going to be in Quito, and they're all going to be working at SEC, which is where Caitlyn works. And we're going to get into like the profile of this school that CJ is going to help me with, but it's similar to a community college. And so we're going to be teaching English to public school teachers, whether they're English teachers or perhaps teaching other subjects. And so they're currently in practice. So these will be young adults, older adults. These are teachers. And so we are training teachers, which I think we can all agree is definitely the most sustainable thing that any volunteer can do. And also very exciting, as you see there, the volunteer commitment fee is going to be significantly less for both the year and the semester. So that's $1,750 for the year, $1,500 for the semester. And we're going to talk about where this money comes from and where it goes in another slide. But for now, CJ, since we have your very valuable opinion and expertise, so I know we're still in the process of confirming this partnership, and it should be done hopefully very soon, but is there anything you want to address specifically, like on the relationship that we have, you know, with SEC, or just kind of our presence in Ecuador in general over the years, because you've been there for a couple years and WorldTeach has been going strong for 22 years, so anything you have to add there would be great.
Yeah, definitely. Well, first what I would say is that, as you mentioned, WorldTeach has been here for 22 years, and during that time, our partnerships have evolved and changed in various ways. Primarily, we have worked with universities, and SEC is actually it's a continuing education center that is part of a university. You can see it says SEC-EPN, so EPN is the National Polytechnic School. So we mostly have worked with universities, but we've partnered with the government in different ways. So this is kind of the most recent evolution of our program. And just to give a little bit of background about this new partnership with SEC, as you mentioned, volunteers will primarily be working with public school English teachers. And to give a quick background on this, within the past 2 years, the government actually gave an English exam to public school English teachers all across the country to see if they were at a sufficient level to be teaching English. And what they found is that around 3,500 teachers all across the country who are currently teaching English don't have the sufficient English levels to be teaching English, which is a huge problem, but it's also a big need where we are able now to step in and provide some support. So SEC is partnering with the Ministry of Education, and we are lucky enough to partner with SEC and to be able to train some of those English teachers who really need some help. So it's a really exciting new partnership with us for that reason, because we get to work with these English teachers. And I'll also mention that these English teachers will be mixed in with the general population of SEC. So for those of you potential volunteers that are listening, you won't necessarily have a class full of English teachers, because that could be a little bit intimidating. But you'll have a mixture of English teachers and maybe some college students, maybe some professionals who want to be studying English, etc. So that's a great opportunity. And then also, as you already mentioned, the lower volunteer commitment fee is obviously great for all of you that are applying. So this is a very exciting change for us, but a big change as well, as you can see from this slide.
Awesome. CJ, thank you so much. Okay, we're going to go on. All right, so the money is always a very, very important question. Okay, so support for the volunteer. I think this is why people join an organization like WorldTeach. It's definitely why I joined it, to make sure that I knew, that somebody would be helping me with my visa and my job and housing and all of that. So as you see here, we're now going to be getting significant funding from SEC. So on average per volunteer, it costs like over $10,000 to support them for the whole year. So that's your visa, housing, monthly stipend, etc. All of these things that are listed in front of you. So we're essentially getting the majority of that $10,000 from the partner, and that's per volunteer, and so that's why the volunteer is paying the remainder. So your money, matched with what we're getting from the partner, is going towards you. So it's going towards your monthly stipend and towards your visa and towards your housing and all of these things. So as you see, the list is extensive, but this is what you are going to feel, I think, confident with, that when you first get there, when you don't know the country, when you don't know what's going on, when you don't know things like, for example, the health system in this country, like you will have that insurance, you will have that mental and physical insurance. And also this, as you see, this does not include airfare. So, it's definitely a financial obligation, and so our volunteers do a lot of fundraising. And we can always get you in touch with volunteers who have been very successful with that fundraising to give you ideas and advice as to how to do that. So let's see. We're going to touch more specifically in the next slide or so on our training and on our support in terms of actual teaching training and professional development in that area, because that's a major pillar for WorldTeach and for our volunteer support. So for now, I think we're good on here. And if anyone has any questions, again, you can type them in, and we're going to continue addressing them together. Okay. Teaching in Ecuador. This is when we can hear a bit more from our panelists. So first off, I'm sure many of you are thinking, I've never taught before. How am I going to know what to do? I was in the same place. I had never taught before. So WorldTeach takes our orientation training very seriously, and it's the first month, or 3 to 4 weeks, when you first get to Ecuador. So the group will have pretty extensive teaching training every day. So lesson plans, classroom management, assessment creation, all of that, and looking specifically at the education system, in Ecuador. So then you're actually going to do a teaching practicum while you're still with CJ, so that he and also the rest of your cohort can kind of help you through those first few days, because we know that it can be very frightening. Our volunteers will also have daily Spanish classes, because no, it is not a requirement that you know Spanish. It's not going to help you or hurt you on your application. So we have those language immersion classes every day. And then you'll also be getting a curriculum that has been designed specifically for our work in Ecuador. And so this is given to you kind of as additional resources. You're not required to use it, but you can definitely use it to supplement your work in the classroom or the existing curriculum in your school. And then finally, each volunteer is also assigned a teacher quality coordinator that's here in the U.S. So you're in contact with them monthly to review lesson plans and assessments, and they can give you additional teaching materials and resources. Okay, so Caitlyn, you have been at 2 different schools now in Ecuador. I guess maybe first we would love to hear about your experience last year as a volunteer. So, you know, what it was like in your school, like who your students were, your class size, the resources you had, and also in comparison to your work now at SEC.
Yeah, definitely. So in Machala, the coast is a lot more, English word, relaxed. A lot more relaxed than the Sierra, which is where Quito is. And my class size ranged from about anywhere from 8 people to 20. And it was not, there was no curriculum. I was able to do whatever I wanted with my book and however I wanted to teach my classes. There wasn't much monitoring as far as, you know, making sure that I was actually in the classroom, but my director was the nicest woman in the world, and they just have so much trust on the coast that they just don't really think about it. And my students were always, I don't know, just always so excited to learn. And it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. My resources, as far as resources went, I kind of had to go along with whatever I had in hand. I did not have access to internet. I had a whiteboard and a classroom, but the classrooms in Machala were more or less almost outside. My institute, the classrooms were outside without air conditioning, and electricity would sometimes go in and out, but it was that was actually more exciting to my students than anything. So that made things interesting. And I don't know, compared to now, I guess it's so much different being in the Sierra. In Quito and teaching at SEC, I do have a curriculum and a book that I need to teach to for tests, but it doesn't make my classroom any less exciting than it was on the coast. I still am allowed to do whatever I want in my classroom as long as the material is taught. And my resources are more than they were on the coast. I have access to projectors and video rooms. I don't have internet, but SEC has 2 buildings, and the other building attached to the actual university has internet, but mine does not, the one that's located in the center of the city, so where the WorldTeach office is. But you know, I don't know, and the students in the Sierra are a lot calmer than the ones on the coast. Coastal students are crazy, and thankfully my classes in SEC are not as hectic, given that the classroom size is smaller. I have for anywhere here, it's generally about 14 to 15 students, and it's a really good size to have. And it's always very constant. There's not anywhere really a drop in students. So I really like it. I really love it here at SEC. And I think that my experience on the coast, though, was, I don't know, I wouldn't be the teacher I was today without having had the experience I had with WorldTeach as a volunteer and the training I had prior. The month I had in Quito before I went to Machala was so reassuring, and it helped me so much, and I felt so much more confident leaving Quito and going to my classroom after orientation. So
Awesome.
I think that whatever volunteers, whatever you guys are worried about, you know, don't worry about it too much, because WorldTeach will take care of you.
Fantastic. Now, one more question for you, Caitlyn. Right now at SEC, what would you say is the biggest kind of cultural challenge that you see in the school or in the classroom, like whether through administration or through students? Anything that, you know, shocked you at the beginning, coming from perhaps a North American perspective?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't know. From a North American perspective, I guess there were just a few things that teachers did for me that the students here, some of them aren't as accustomed to, and some of them actually might come off as offensive. Like there was one which, one custom I guess in particular for a more specific example is passing of papers. I kind of, you know, I don't know, teachers in the States, we don't really think about it. They just give you the paper. If it falls, it falls. If it doesn't hit your hand, whatever, you have the paper. Well, here, I swear, if you do not hand that piece of paper to the student, they're going to be a little bit, they're not offended, not all of them, but some of them will be surprised. Because there's a lot more formality in the classrooms than there are in the States. And especially from the coast, there is a lot less formality on the coast, a lot less formality in North America, I feel like. And in Quito, the students just, they're so professional. And then, you know, once they open up to you, the dynamic changes, obviously. Your students will open up to you as they get to know you. But at first, it is very much so you are teacher, they are student, and they listen to you, and that is your role.
Awesome. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're going to keep hearing more from you. So we now have Becca Lorenzen on the line, our other panelist. Becca, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thanks for joining us.
Sure.
So you're jumping in. We are talking about teaching in Ecuador. I would love for you to quickly introduce yourself and where you were placed back in, I believe, 2012, correct, as a volunteer?
Yes.
So just a quick introduction to your time there, and then I'm going to ask you a couple questions about specifically your teaching experience.
Great. So thanks so much for having me. My name is Becca, like Brooke said, and I was placed with my fiance in Quito at SEC. So I might have kind of some overlap stories with Caitlyn about some of the resources and stuff like that. But yeah, I was placed there, and I actually ended up living with 2 different host families during my time. So I was there, and for the first couple of months during the training and for the first couple of months of teaching, we were with one host family, and I don't know, my fiance and I just really felt like we wanted more from the teaching or from the family experience. Our family was very, very helpful and very sweet, but also very busy, and so they were a lot of times like, you know, we just weren't getting as much exposure to Spanish language and culture and stuff like that. So I think in about January of that year, we approached the WorldTeach staff and we're like, look, we really just kind of want a family that's, you know, more, I don't know, like just has more time to spend with us and more weekends to, you know, do activities with us and stuff like that. So at about the halfway point, we switched host families, and then we're living much closer to our school and stuff like that. And we ended up having just a wonderful experience. And it was kind of neat too to be exposed to 2 different families and within the, you know, the context of Ecuadorian culture. So I don't know, is there anything else that I can say to that, or the other specific things?
Yeah, that's perfect. So we're actually going to talk more about host families and the living situation a bit more in a couple minutes. But for right now, so you were teaching at SEC. One thing I want to address is like how much time you are actually involved in, you know, planning your classes and what your job responsibilities kind of extended to. Because obviously we know that, you know, our volunteers are full-time teachers, but did you get involved like in other activities on campus? Were you on school grounds for like 40 hours a week, or were you doing lesson planning at home, like, you know, after work hours? What was your time commitment? Because we are obviously, again, full-time volunteers. This is hard work. So if you could kind of touch on that, that would be great.
Sure, I'd love to. So I guess for me, I actually think throughout my whole service when I was teaching at SEC, I had 2 evening classes, a 4 to 6 class and a 6 to 8 class. And so kind of how that ended up working in my schedule is that I would wake up in the morning, plan for my classes. Once we're with the second host family, we'd have lunch together as a family, and then I'd go over to the school, and I'd usually like make copies of handouts or whatever, quizzes or whatever I was going to hand out that day, kind of on the way to class. And it depended, I think. So 8-week cycles, and so sometimes the classes you were teaching would change every 8 weeks, and so it really depended on the cycle. Like the first cycle, I had 2 classes of intermediate 2, and so that worked, I think, in my favor, because I basically got to write 1 lesson plan per day instead of 2. And then that kind of changed like throughout my service. So at times I would have I'd maybe have another intermediate 2 class, but then I'd have an academic 1 class. So then I was sometimes using my old lesson plans from before, or tweaking them, or making them fit a little bit better, and then also teaching to a new class. So the amount of prep kind of depended, and it was definitely like much more in the beginning, kind of when I was still trying to get my feet underneath me and figure out, like what's my style, what kinds of activities work well with this specific class. Like sometimes you'll find when I was teaching to intermediate 2 classes that I had 1 class that was mostly high school students, and then 1 that was mostly adults. And so something that works with a class of high school students doesn't necessarily work with a class of adults. And so sometimes, that was part of my planning time as well. I guess like there definitely were, I would also use that morning time before my classes to like grade papers, grade tests. I did a lot of free writing activities with my classes, so I would have them keep a journal and start every day with a little journal entry. And then so, obviously the times at which I collected those, I tried to make that over the weekend so that when I was doing corrections and writing comments in those, that I had more time to do that. But I think it's pretty accurate to say that overall it was 40 hours for sure during the first cycle, and maybe a little bit less, again, kind of depending on if I had overlapping classes or not.
Perfect. Okay, great. That's a good kind of overall representation of what's going on. And obviously we know that everyone's class schedule is going to be different, and therefore everybody's workloads can sometimes vary, and also people's work styles vary. Mm-hmm. So it definitely requires a lot of flexibility. Like you just said, Becca, that you were teaching high school students, and we're probably thinking, okay, SEC is, community college, it's just going to be college students and older, but as CJ was saying, it could be kind of a mix of anybody that wants to. It's like continuing education, which is open to essentially anybody. So yes, flexibility, very important. And Caitlyn, did you, Caitlyn, no, I've already asked you this. Becca,
yes.
Did you find that you had like any major cultural challenges? Because I ask because, as most people listening, we have the privilege of coming from probably a very specific type of educational background where you were, felt safe in your school, and things like corporal punishment didn't exist. And I think we're lucky that that also is not a problem in Ecuador, but I ask because a lot of these countries that we work in have just completely different cultural expectations, and things are allowed or permitted that we wouldn't have necessarily agreed with. So anything that stood out like that for you?
I think one of the cultural things that was kind of difficult for me to adjust to, and I kind of had to pick and choose when I was going to adjust to this, was the kind of idea of like the second and third and fourth and fifth chance on things. So what I mean by that is sometimes I would have like a student who, again, say we had 8-week cycles, and within the policy of SEC, we were, the kids could miss, or the students could miss, I think, up to 8 times with no consequences for their grade. So imagine that's a kid or a student missing 2 hours of class every week, something like that. And so with very little consequence for their grade, but as soon as they miss 8 times, then they have to get a higher grade on the final exam in order to pass. So I would have students sometimes come to me, and they would, at the end of the cycle, like the last week of classes, and they would say, teacher, like, please, like, I have 12 absences. Can you help me? And I was so confused the first time it happened. I was like, help you with what? Like you weren't at class. Like and basically I think, the cultural thing is that if I ask you really nice and kind of ask you over and over again, I think a lot of teachers would say, okay, I'll like erase some of your absences. So that was really hard for me from an American standpoint, because I was like, nope, like you made these choices, we're gonna, have the consequences follow. So I think that was a real challenge for me in that way. And it's kind of strange, but that was kind of like, that kind of permeated through so many different things. You'd be like, you would give a test and somebody would get a question wrong, and it meant that their grade was like an 89 instead of a 90, and they'd be like, teacher, please. And you're like, no, but you got the answer incorrect, and I'm not going to change it. And so you kind of had to like decide like when it was okay to be flexible about that and when it wasn't. And I think the important thing for me was just to like set those rules and expectations with my class right away on the first day. Mm-hmm. So I would often like, we would make classroom rules with class input. So I would say, okay, what rules do you think are important in this classroom? And the class, no matter what level, would come up with their ideas for like what was respectful behavior and how do you show your teacher and your classmates respect and stuff like that. And then if there was anything missing, like I had my own set of rules. So no cheating. Here are the rules about being late. And I would say on the first day, like, the watch that I have on my arm is the real time, and just because your watch says a different time, this is what I'm going by, and just be really clear up front, so that you can kind of refer to that later and not feel bad about it, and just being consistent. It's strange, like, to think. I don't think I didn't have that much like classroom management or behavior management that I had to deal with too much in my classes, but every once in a while something would come up, and I'd be really glad that I had established those rules kind of early on.
Yeah, definitely. Good for you, especially as a somewhat new teacher. That's great that you got that right from the beginning. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I had a good question from the audience, and this definitely rolls into job responsibilities and time commitment. So when school is in session, you are in session, right? You are working. When school is on vacation, the volunteer is also on vacation, which we know is a beautiful thing. CJ, do you know if SEC holds any classes during the weekends? Like, would volunteers ever be working during the weekends?
SEC does hold classes during the weekends, but volunteers don't teach those classes. So the Saturday classes at SEC are kind of unique. The length of the cycle for a Saturday class is different than a normal cycle. And they meet for, I don't remember how many hours. Caitlyn would know how many hours they meet Saturday. But that's not something that WorldTeach volunteers do. So WorldTeach volunteers teach 20 hours of class per week, Monday through Friday, so that's two-hour classes a day. And that will be very consistent at SEC. But
okay.
Just Monday through Friday.
Fantastic. So yes, of course, that leaves your weekends, free, and we're going to talk about how people become involved in the community and what they do with their free time, which of course is going to, I'm sure, include time to travel, which was also the question we just received. So we'll reflect on that momentarily. All right, thanks, guys. Let's continue on into living in Ecuador. Again, this is your life. This is your everyday life. This is your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. This is not just vacation. This is not just work. This is life. So as we discussed with the new partnership, all of our volunteers are going to be in Quito and working at SEC. So normally our volunteer placement process is much more complex than this. So actually our volunteers in Ecuador are going to be free of a lot of the ambiguity that our volunteers usually experience at the beginning, because you don't usually know where your placement is until a couple weeks before you depart for Ecuador, for the country. So this is obviously clearing that up. So as for housing placements, that I think everybody wants to hear about. So Caitlyn, I know it's different because last year you were living on the coast, but still, could you tell us what your housing situation was like, you know, who you lived with, what amenities you had or didn't have, and any, you know, difficulties or challenges that you faced?
Did you want, I'm sorry, I didn't hear about my Machala site or about Quito?
Well, because as a volunteer, you were on Quito, you were on the coast, so you can talk about that because I'm not sure what your housing situation is this year, but since you're independent, it's kind of, you know, not as relevant. So for your experience as a volunteer last year.
Well, okay. In Machala, the coast is a lot cheaper than Quito, so I'm not quite sure how much help I'll be on this one.
Or maybe
I can talk about Quito from a volunteer perspective.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah. So I came to Quito after my service, but I know what my stipend would have been while I was in Quito, and I guess it really depends on what you're going to do. I had a volunteer friend who was in Quito the same time I was once I became independent, and she needed extra money outside because she traveled a lot, and she ate out a lot outside of her volunteer family, or host family, I'm sorry. So it depends on what you want to do. I would say that, you know, having a little extra cushion money from back home is a smart idea in Quito, but if you I guess, you know, travel is possible. Everything is possible on what they give you with WorldTeach with your stipend. My advice is, you know, eat with your host family as much as possible because just eating meals itself are a unique cultural experience. And on top of that, you do save a lot of money because what you'll find yourself doing if you're not I don't know, depending on how culturally adventurous you are, some of you might find yourselves eating in spots and locations where they're more expensive, where they're more, as they say, like gringo targeted. And Quito has a lot of that because it's a huge tourist area. But, you know, I would say that as a volunteer, at least on the coast, I definitely used my monthly stipend every month. I didn't eat with my host family as often as I probably should have. So I spent more money on food than anything. And I find that if you limit yourself on that, then you won't have any problems at all. And travel is so much cheaper here than in the States, and it's so much more, I don't know, it's just easier to travel here. It's cheaper, and yeah, that's all I got.
And do you have internet in your house right now in Quito?
So I do, and I had internet with my first host family in Quito. However, what I found out was that internet is not, it's common, but not every host family had it. A few of my volunteer friends, their host families didn't have. Most do, just because Quito's a big city, and you'll find that a lot of families actually have maybe siblings or daughters or sons that study abroad, and they need to have internet connection to keep in touch with their family. Many families in Quito have family in Spain. So many do. From my experience, I knew that if a family didn't have internet and a volunteer wanted it, it was up to the volunteer to at least help or provide their own internet if the family didn't need it. But it wasn't included exactly when I was a volunteer. I'm not so sure at this time.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a case-by-case basis. But actually on that note, CJ, maybe you can kind of address this, like in general, what sort of amenities volunteers will or won't have in Quito?
Sure. Well, the first thing I would say is that every host family is very different. From the families, there's a wide variety of types of families. So there are families with siblings, like Caitlyn mentioned. I have host families here in Quito that might be an older couple or a single woman, just a wide variety of different types of families that decide to host volunteers. But they're all fantastic, and each place is just a little bit different. The one thing that typically can guarantee is that the volunteer will have their own room, have their own bedroom, which is nice. Not necessarily their own bathroom. The bathroom might be shared with other members of the family. One issue in the Sierra is having hot water, but for the most part, all of our families have reliable hot water. Sometimes you might not have hot water for a little bit because the tank of gas has gone empty or that sort of thing.
I'd say that's
with internet.
Sorry, that's just Latin America. That's
Latin America. Yes. You might, but Quito, we're at 9,000 feet, so it is chilly here in the mornings and in the evenings. So when you're trying to take a shower and there's no hot water, that can be a little bit frustrating. Mm-hmm. You mentioned internet. Like Caitlyn said, there's no guarantee that your family will have internet, but I would say a majority of our host families have internet at home right now. So that's just becoming more and more common. I'm also trying to make sure that all of our host families here in Quito are as close to teaching sites as possible, because Quito is, on a global scale, it's not a huge city, but it's 2.5 million people, so it is big. And it's a very long city. The layout is quite odd. So families that live far north or far south, you can end up with a pretty long commute. So at the moment, I'm trying to make sure that all of our host families that we're using are pretty centrally located, so that it doesn't take too long to get to and go back home from school. And then Caitlyn mentioned the food as well. One thing that all host families are obligated to do is to provide 3 meals a day for volunteers. So many families still eat at home during lunch. So like Caitlyn said, one thing you don't have to worry about spending extra money on, unless you want to, is food, because you can have breakfast, lunch, and dinner with your host family, and that's a really great time for that cultural exchange with your family as well.
Yeah, and you guys, that is so rare in our WorldTeach placements around the globe. It varies completely country by country, and so that is a huge advantage for our volunteers, financially and culturally. So take it. If it's there, take it.
Mm-hmm.
And one thing I would mention on the finances as well, on the slide it says that the monthly stipend is approximately $450. It's actually at $500 right now. So that has gone up recently it's gone up. When I was a volunteer, when Caitlyn was a volunteer, it was $450, but it's recently gone up to $500. And that certainly helps in Quito because costs are a little bit higher in Quito. And then the one thing that I would mention from that is that the volunteers pay roughly half of that to their host families for their room and board and for food. And while that seems like a very significant chunk of your monthly stipend, about half, which it is, it's also a pretty good deal because here in Quito, rent and that sort of thing can be much higher than that. So for roughly $250 for room and board and 3 meals a day, that's a really great deal.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, fantastic. Finances are super important. Housing is very important, but my last exceptionally important note on this page, because we're about getting out of time, is safety. CJ, can you speak to, the safety situation in Quito, what measures volunteers take to ensure their safety, whether it's in their homes, schools, public transportation, or on the street? Anything. Again, Latin America, this is something we have to be very sensitive to, and I'm personally very sensitive to it after living in Colombia. So as long as we address it, we can control it as much as possible anyways. So CJ, we would love your feedback on that.
Yes, definitely. Here in Quito, safety is, throughout the country, not just here in Quito. Safety is an issue. We want to make sure that volunteers are as safe as possible, and there are some common safety issues that pop up. The most common safety issue I would say here in Quito is just petty theft. Whether it's pickpocketing on a bus, or whether it's a robbery on the street, that sort of thing would be the most common thing. A couple of years ago, we had some incidents with volunteers, but thankfully there really have not been incidents with volunteers here in Quito over the past 18 to 24 months. For me, living here for about a year and a half, I would say that I had the very unfortunate experience of having a bike stolen, but that was completely my own fault in leaving my bike in the wrong place. And then I also had a cheap little Nokia phone pickpocketed while I was on a very crowded bus. So public transportation can be a place where pickpocketing happens and that sort of thing. So what do volunteers do to prevent these incidents, and what does WorldTeach do to prevent these incidents? During orientation, we have definitely some very good safety training with former volunteers, former or current volunteers, with a representative, a safety officer from the U.S. Embassy here in Quito, as well as with another safety expert. And then during the year, during your service and living here in Quito, really it's just creating smart habits, being smart about where you're going in the city, what time you're walking through certain areas, what time you're walking by yourself, those sorts of things, and just trying to make sure that you don't look like a tourist, because Quito is a very popular tourist city, and all of us as North Americans will kind of stick out as gringos, but we can certainly take some steps to make sure that we look less like tourists and more like someone who lives here. So I think because of that, that's why in the recent past, volunteers here in Quito have had good luck and have not had any robberies or other safety issues and that sort of thing. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, I did just have a good question from an attendee about SEC. Like, what would you say are the levels of English being taught? You know, is it going to be beginner, intermediate, advanced? Everything could be different, or in general, any comment on that, CJ?
Yeah, I would just say that at SEC they teach a wide variety of levels, from basic beginning classes to TOEFL preparation or advanced conversation classes. However, SEC has a large student body, and because of that they have a pretty large staff that is made up of Ecuadorians and as well as native speakers. For the most part, native speakers are used for intermediate and advanced classes. So usually Ecuadorian teachers will teach the basic classes, and then native speakers, so all of you volunteers, will teach the more advanced classes, kind of intermediate and above.
Perfect. Okay, and another great question, and this is kind of getting off topic, but very important. Becca, so you are back in the States, and now I'm not, you can kind of talk about how your experience in Ecuador helped you with your career after Ecuador ended, after your service ended, you know, whether applying for jobs or graduate school, you know, if you're in the education field or not.
Sure, I'd love to speak to that. So I'm actually, my background even before I went to Ecuador was in social work. So before I even went to do my service in Ecuador, I had gotten my master's in social work with the intention of, you know, doing most of my professional career in that field. But part of the reason for my motivation for going to Ecuador in the first place was I kind of saw it as an opportunity. I've done teaching overseas before, and so I knew that that was something I would really like. Also, I knew that as a social worker, it was really going to benefit me, and it was kind of my responsibility at this point to become at least conversationally fluent in Spanish. And so that's kind of the reason why I was seeking out Ecuador specifically. And as to like the way it has affected my, you know, my career at this point, I just think, so the job that I do right now is community-based therapy for kids and adolescents on the west and southwest sides of Chicago. So at first glance, it doesn't necessarily look like that's applicable, but I think what's so cool about that experience is that, my interviewer and my boss and stuff like that, after I was hired, said, we looked at your resume and we saw this experience, and we knew basically from seeing this that you were, into working in different communities, that you were, flexible, that you had some kind of working knowledge of Spanish, that you just shows like your ability to, go into unstructured situations and things that are very new and just kind of make things happen and be able to assess like what kinds of things need to happen. So I think, I think if this experience, no matter really what field you're going into, if you are framing it right in your resume and in your cover letters and stuff like that, I think it can only show as a benefit to your, your determination and your willingness to try new and difficult tasks in situations that you're maybe not familiar with. So I think if you kind of like, it might not look like, oh, teaching in Ecuador would directly relate to this career that I want to go into, but I think that it directly relates to most jobs and the characteristics that a lot of careers are looking for in new employees. So.
Awesome. Perfect. Thank you so much. I completely agree. Okay, one more question, and then we're going to have a minute on our application process because we are at the 8 o'clock hour, but all of your questions have been so good. Caitlyn, I want to hear from you as to like what you did on weekends, how you got involved with the local community, whether in Quito or whether on the coast, what allowed you to become part of life there, like not just the school, not just class, but what did you do to create a life and a community for yourself there?
Definitely. Well, I got involved with a local daycare on the coast, and I found that it's, it's really, if you like working with kids at least, it's pretty easy to do that here because they are very, very excited to have their children or students interacted with English speakers or foreigners. And I loved it. Many people here, most people here are very much so open to you asking to volunteer. I know in Quito there are a bunch of different kinds of programs and places here where you can volunteer, and you can find any of your interests no matter what they are. On the coast, I was able to connect through my host family. So I had asked my mom basically like what could I do, and it turns out my host sister's daycare wanted a volunteer to like do some English activities with the kids. And more than that, I got involved with my students and in their lives. They I know that a couple people before me had like language exchanges, things like that, and the students love that kind of stuff, and any chance to hang out with teacher outside of the classroom is like finding gold for them. It's super simple. If you look for it, it's very easy to find a way to get involved in your community, or at least with your host family, because your host family knows so many people, and then you meet those people, and then they want to introduce you to their friends and their husbands and their sons because they want you to get married to them. It's open arms here. They will love you and take you in, and you can get involved. And especially in Quito, being a huge city, I know Becca was involved in a few things, and those seemed so exciting. I was so excited to move to Quito, primarily through Becca's experiences and stalking her on Facebook. Sorry, Becca. But it'll really be a great experience. And your students as well, because of the age ranges, you'll be able to find a lot. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you so much. I would completely agree that these communities are just open arms for us, and so excited and grateful to have us there. But also for the volunteers, it's still a bit of work when you first get there. you still have to put yourself out there and, you know, not be scared to speak Spanish and not be scared to be in an uncomfortable situation, because at the beginning it is really new and overwhelming. But as soon as you put that work in, you will be received with so much warmth and so many opportunities. So yes, if you put yourself out there, you will receive so much more than you can even imagine. All right, fantastic. Okay, so we're going on to our last page. Caitlyn Ivester, Admissions Coordinator. You have been silent and listening so attentively, and thank you for answering all of our text questions. Can you please speak a very quick moment about our application process and the opportunities out there for people for this program and going forward, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Brooke, you've laid out a really good summary of the application requirements and the items that are needed. I'm seeing people on our list that are in a variety of stages. Some of you guys are accepted. Some of you just began an application today. So for the ones who are still in their application, that first stage are the resume, personal statement, and transcript. And then the second stage is the 2 letters of recommendation and an interview with me via Skype or over the phone if Skype isn't possible. So basically, we're going to be accepting applications until December 1st, and that's for the February departure. The September departure will be accepting applications until July. But basically, we'll be accepting them on a rolling basis, and that's pretty important because we've received a lot of applications for the winter departures, especially for the February departure. And so I would definitely suggest to you guys that you get your materials in sooner rather than later, and that way you have the best chance of, you know, having your shot for being considered for the February departure. So that's pretty important. I would definitely say getting your materials in soon is something you should strive for. Now, I want to reassure you, though, that if for some reason the February departure doesn't work out, whether we fill up or whether it just doesn't work out for some reason, we absolutely will consider you for either the September Ecuador departure, or if you are interested in another program, that could be an option too if you are interested in departing sooner. So absolutely something you can just talk to me about, and you can email me at admissions@worldteach.org or info@worldteach.org, and I'd be really happy to answer your questions and to help you move the application process along.
Fantastic. Okay. Yes, definitely good to note that we have our September departure as well. And also our Ecuador program is unique in the fact that we have both a semester option and also the year option. But in my opinion, a semester is nada. If you go big or go home. Like a year flies by. And that's why all of these people that we're on the line with right now are still in Ecuador years later, because you become part of it. And so 6 months is nothing. Go big or go home. On that note, I think we should probably be going home. So if anybody has any additional questions, please reach out to us. We will be reaching out to you guys with more info. And hopefully we will see you in Ecuador. Nos vemos en Quito. Gracias a todos. Thank you guys so much for joining us, especially for our panelists from Ecuador and from the States. And for all of you guys listening, gracias y que descansen. Rest, enjoy your night, and thanks for your time. Have a good night, you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.